Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then we consider what you know of the news of the day. Malaysia is on the verge of a major constitutional reform. The Constitution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2026 will soon be tabled for its second reading in Parliament. And in this amendment, it proposes separating the role of the Attorney General and the Public Prosecutor. Now, the move is intended to strengthen prosecutorial independence and public confidence in the criminal justice system. However, we have civil society warning us that the proposed changes may not go far enough to ensure that the public prosecutor is insulated from executive influence. As Parliament prepares to debate the bill, the question is, will this reform deliver prosecutorial independence or will it simply create the appearance of it? Well, joining me on the show to discuss this further is Pushpan Murugiah, who is the CEO of C4, which is the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. Pushpan, good to have you back on the show. If I may begin our conversation by having you kind of explain very briefly to us or to those who may not know, why has the Attorney General and the public prosecutor's role been combined? So one is as legal advisors to the government and the other is public prosecutor. Why is having the two the same role seen as problematic?
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me again, Lisa. So maybe just to contextualize the conversation that's going forward, we need to look at the position now, which is basically the fused position of the Attorney General and the Public Prosecutor. Now, under the Constitution, the Attorney General is an ex officio and holds the position of the Public Prosecutor. Now, we need to understand there is two dividing roles that they play. One, technically, the Attorney General, or we call him AG, basically he's the advisor to the current or standing government. So, for example, issues bilateral trade, conflicts, legal issues, those things is where the AG plays a role in advising the government what they can do, what are legal provisions. Now, that is apart from the PP. The public prosecutor role is basically dealing with prosecution of technical or criminal cases. So you have a very wide separation of function, but the problem is when they fuse together, and AG being the public prosecutor ex officio means that he also controls under the Constitution which cases to be prosecuted, which cases to be given DNAA, which cases to be pulled back. So it gives him very wide power. And the concern is not so much the structure, but the structure that links back to the Attorney General, because Attorney General is appointed by the Prime Minister. So in that structure itself, it creates that linkages to the executive. In that context, any decision that made by the public prosecutor de facto actually is the AG decision. In that sense as well, when there are cases that appear to be selectively prosecuted, then you create that perception where the rules are not applied properly. So that is the reason why civil society has always been calling for a separation of the role and ensuring the PP now is free from any of those influence, but not forgetting the powers that PP has very strong. Even they are free, they also need to be accountable, right, to at least to Parliament. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah.
Right. Well, civil society, yes, has long been calling for this, but C4 specifically, for as long as I can remember, has been pushing for this. So why isn't this bill up to mark? Why isn't it seen to be the meaningful reform that it is touted to be?
Okay, of course, C4 has always been pushing it simply because the reason I mentioned earlier, and also the recent cases, for example, again, Zaid Hamidi case, you actually have a prima facie case, then it stopped to become a DNA, and then become NFA. So these are decisions that creates extremely doubt in terms of how the justice system works. So hence we were calling for it. Now, in this context, yes, it's a good initiative. We're going to have a separation of PP and AG, but again, it may sound cliche, always goes down to the details of the particular act. Now, in the instances in this act that actually creates a lot of potentially future problems that we might face. Now, maybe very quickly I can explain the fact that the current structure is where the AG is appointed by the Prime Minister. Now, the same structure now will actually be applied where is transferred to another individual. So the question now is, who is the individual? And the individual actually is the king, Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So now we also need to also understand, when we call for the independence of institution, we're calling for the independence from the executive. Now, we also need to understand that the king is the head of the government. Technically, or even under the constitution, he is part of the executive. So the purpose of now shifting the roles away from the executive does not come into play, because you're limiting within the executive as well. You're shifting from the prime minister to the king. And in that instance, there are also other repercussions that we don't want to tarnish the institution of the Raja Raja, because they will now get sucked into political play, conversations, prosecution. So, I mean, those are concerns that we actually have. There are a few more, but I think those are more, I suppose, more detailed, more technical in terms of to explain. But these are the main ones, the appointment process itself.
Okay, well then, Pushpan, talk to me about how to avoid that. So if the idea of the bill is really to ensure that the public prosecutor is truly independent, it's insulated from any influence, what would recommend that? What would be the proposal to address that?
Yes, currently the proposal under the Act is using a commission, a sitting commission, to submit names to the king, simplify the process. This is the current one under the bill. What we are proposing is, in that dual process, let's have a tripartite process, meaning now we bring in the public chamber into the process, where the voice of the public is in that chamber. So now what we do, we're suggesting is this: the committee or the commission can actually recommend 3 or 4 names, and that names can be now given to that select committee or committee created by Parliament, bipartisan, hopefully is led by opposition, to actually look at the names, and they only have the right to veto it. So we don't allow even the politicians to play a role in getting the names in there. So they're only allowed to veto. So once they have got a name that they agree upon, then the name goes to the king for his signature. So again, it creates that ceremonial position and it keeps the institutions isolated from nonsense and all these political issues, but gets the public chambers involved in the process of appointing a very powerful person and needs to be really accountable to the public.
Okay, so another layer of, I guess, transparency and a check and balance. Why is this important? Help us understand, Pushpan. What are the risks at play here if the public prosecutor is not seen to be genuinely independent, especially using, I guess, the historical cases in this respect?
So, I mean, now the issue now is this: you are actually shifting the responsibility or the process from one individual to another individual. Now, the issue now is, how do you now not avoid the same criticism you have in the previous structure, which is, again, potentially influencing a decision, selective prosecution. Maybe the individuals that are being selected possibly will be different in groupings as well. You cannot decide, you see. So you will have the same problem, the same criticism layered against a new system, a new process. But more importantly, now those criticisms will be layered into one of our most highest institutions, which is supposed to be insulated against all political chaos, politicking, and all that. So now you're bringing that institution into a play that people now will comment, and the opportunity to embarrass the royalties become very high. So I think that is a major consideration for us, to not have the same process where we put in a public chamber to actually iron out the whole process through a public chamber, public voice, transparency, and also it allows us to bring a mechanism of accountability back into Parliament.
Right. So what has been, so after the first reading of this bill, I'm sure civil society has put their brains together and also gone out to talk to lawmakers and members of Parliament. What are you hearing from them? Are they receptive to some of the concerns that you're raising? I'm wondering if there is still an opportunity for Parliament to strengthen this bill before it's passed. We only have a few days of sitting left in Dewan Rakyat. So what's been the feedback that you're hearing, Pushpan?
Yeah, I think civil society, at least a small group of us, has begun to actually start lobbying ministers, not so much ministers, more MPs and backbenchers. But I think what has happened now is we have been having conversations with a number of MPs. We have been doing a couple of briefings to a few commissions and also our own APPGM, All Party Parliamentary Group as well. And we also helped us to set up some meetings here and there. So what we have said out there is basically the main issue now is the time frame we have to actually make changes. And what we are pushing for now is for that bill to be referred back to the committee, special committee, so that they can actually amend and make specific changes to improve the bill. Don't misunderstand. Civil society still wants the AG and PP separation, that's for sure. But again, we must have a bill that actually reflects the spirit of the intention behind why you want it to be separated. So our hope, and I think the opportunity now is to get that committee, the special committee or select committee, to actually to go through the bill, strengthen it, make it clean up, get engagement from academics, from us, from civil societies, from the business community, get them to put input and then clean up the bill, and then you retable it for second and third reading. So that can go up in June, July. There's no harm. We've waited for so many years. So there's no harm in another few more months, okay? We cannot have the same problem we have the government procurement bill going through in 3 days with this bill that actually has a significant, because it's a constitutional amendment. It's not a simple majority. It's impacting us for the rest of our lives after this.
Pushpan, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. That was Pushpan Murugiah from C4. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more on this in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the Constitution Amendment Bill 2026, which is set to be tabled for its second reading in Parliament and would formally separate the powers of the Public Prosecutor from the Attorney General. Now, does this bill represent meaningful reform? Well, joining me on the line now is Maha Balakrishnan, who is a Parliamentary and Institutional Development Specialist. Maha, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Welcome back. So earlier on the show, we heard from civil society how they've been raising concerns over the need to do more to ensure the public prosecutor's independence from any influence, be that from the executive or the like. I'm wondering how you see it, Maha. Why exactly doesn't the structural separation of the two roles, why doesn't that alone guarantee prosecutorial independence?
Well, first of all, thank you, Melisa, for having me back, but more importantly, for covering this really important issue. Well, yes, just separating the public prosecutor and the attorney general doesn't deliver what we need, which is independence in both the execution of their functions, but also transparency and accountability. Yeah. So even though the attorney general and the public prosecutor might clearly have different job scopes that don't overlap, that's not going to guarantee, for example, that the appropriately qualified and ethical individuals will be hired to those roles. For that, we need a transparent and also multi-layered appointments process. At the same time, while these individuals are required to act independently, they must also, as a fail-safe, be accountable for their actions. So we need those mechanisms of accountability in place. The only way to achieve all of this is to have both legal and procedural safeguards in place to ensure independence, transparency, and accountability.
Okay, so talk to me about that multi-layered appointments process that you mentioned. How do we look at safeguards being put in place for the appointment process? So I read that the appointments process will go through the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. Tell us more about that, and if that is enough to protect independence.
So before I share that, just to give a quick context to your viewers, you know, a lot of people I come across think that safeguards for democracy is very complicated or difficult to understand. But actually, it's not that difficult to understand if you apply the thinking to your own lives. So if we look at our own experiences, how were we hired to our jobs? How was our boss, or how were our senior management individuals hired to our jobs? Who had the power to decide whether to hire them? Was it one person that made that decision? Or was it several people, right? So similarly, in those situations, what are the safeguards to remove that person? And finally, in terms of, you know, removal processes, can your boss or senior management keep their jobs indefinitely with no retirement age? So it's really about applying the experiences we all have in our daily lives to the political system. So when we talk about a multi-layered appointment process for the public prosecutor, that's exactly what we're asking for. The role of the public prosecutor is so important. There is so much power vested in the hands of one individual, and it's a kind of power that impacts all of us, because many of us, unfortunately, will have some sort of encounter with the criminal process, either as potential defendants, but more often than not, as potentially as victims, right? So ensuring that the public prosecutor's appointment is, you know, that we pick the right person and that the person is accountable is key. So when we talk about a multi-layered appointment process, what we're looking for is to ensure that the power to hire the public prosecutor isn't left in the hands of any one actor, any one political actor. That's important. Secondly, we're also looking to ensure that there's a process that allows for the filtration of various candidates, not just one candidate, but various candidates, right? So if we look at the current bill, what's being offered by the government is a two-tiered process where the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has been given discretion to appoint a public prosecutor on the recommendation of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. Now, there's this really interesting difference in our constitution between a recommendation from a commission and from advice by a commission. They're entirely two different things, and they put different obligations and different restrictions on the exercise of discretion, for example. So in this case, it's interesting that the chosen term is recommendation. So we need to then understand, who is this Judicial and Legal Service Commission? Now, the Judicial and Legal Service Commission is really the commission that controls, manages, regulates the judicial arm of the judicial arm, but the lower courts, not the high courts, as well as the legal services, so the prosecutorial services that we see now. So that commission has been around a long time. It's well embedded under the Constitution. But what the government is also doing is, apart from structuring this new appointment process, they are also introducing new members into the Judicial and Legal Service Commission, and retaining some members that perhaps should no longer be there. So, for example, when we talk about the separation of the Attorney General and the Public Prosecutor, one would imagine that perhaps the Attorney General shouldn't be playing a role in the appointment of the Public Prosecutor, or, more importantly, of every Public Prosecutor, Deputy Public Prosecutor that will be employed and appointed and carrying out the functions of prosecution across the country. The Attorney General should have no role in that. Unfortunately, we see that the Attorney General's position has been retained in the Constitution. So too has the Solicitor General's position. Now, both of these are actually going to be either political appointees or within the political arm of government from now on, as we understand it. So the composition of the body that provides recommendations to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is very important. But so too is the extent of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong's powers. What can we do? If I may then give suggestions or recommendations, I think you've heard already this idea of having a multi-layered process, with different groups or actors involved. I would certainly support that. I do think that there should be a tripartite process, not to remove the JLSC or to necessarily curtail the discretionary powers, but it is important that the role of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong be carried out or conducted on very good advice. Yeah. So for that reason, it's probably not the best idea to continue to have discretionary powers given to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, but I'll come back to that in a second. I do agree with the suggestion that what we should probably be looking to do is to have a tripartite process where the judicial and legal services suggests a set of names, a short list of names. The names then go through a filtration process by Parliament, either through a parliamentary committee or otherwise. And through that filtration process, a final candidate is then recommended to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong for appointment. This ensures that this ensures that when an appointment is actually made by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, it would actually be on the advice not just of one body, but it would also include parliamentary vetting and parliamentary support. I think that's key. Parliamentary support is key to protect the Yang di-Pertuan Agong's position. And secondly, it also means that Parliament has to take responsibility. They have to finally take responsibility for who is appointed as the public prosecutor. And then the people can hold parliamentarians accountable if something goes wrong.
Right, definitely. You mentioned a bit earlier, which I love the analogy of our own work experience, and we don't want anyone to be in a role indefinitely. So you mentioned the removal process. So talk to me about that, the tenure and the removal process of this public prosecutor role.
So I think when we look at removal process, we need to look at several different aspects. Number one, what is the term of the public prosecutor? Because that matters, right? What's the length of term? Number two, is that term of service something that's renewable or not? And then number three, is there retirement age? And number four is whether there's a removal process in the event that there is misconduct in office, right? So really these four aspects, once again, something that all of us should be familiar with in our daily lives. So in this case, what the government has proposed is that the public prosecutor has a fixed term of 7 years. However, the proposal is silent on whether a person who serves 7 years can actually reapply. Now, in a briefing by the Attorney General's chambers to Parliament on Monday, the Attorney General himself made it very clear that they are leaving the door open for a public prosecutor who has served 7 years to reapply and to continue in that role for another term, and unfortunately, potentially indefinitely, because the Constitution is also not suggesting a retirement age. So which is a little strange, because even judges of the High Court, federal court judges, have a retirement age. So I think that is something that really needs to be taken care of. So number one, clarity on whether the public prosecutor's term can be renewed. Ideally, I think a lot of people would say perhaps not. I'm of the same view. Secondly, whether there should be a retirement age, and I think the majority would be in favor of retirement age. Right. Finally, on the removal process, the process that's being suggested is similar to that for a judge. A special panel would have to be set up, established to run an inquiry to see if there has been any misconduct, and the need to remove the public prosecutor.
Maha, we've only got a few days of sitting left in this parliamentary session. Do you think there's still an opportunity for Parliament to strengthen this bill? And what would you like to see them prioritise?
So a lot of the things that we've talked about, the improvements that are necessary to this bill, we've only talked about the highlights. There are actually a number of other things as well. Some of this is simple to make, so they can be done in a couple of, even over the next few days. A lot of them actually require more thinking, especially when you need to sort of spell out the details of the procedures and so on. So my expectation of Parliament, my ask of Parliament, is that this bill should actually be moved to a select committee for further study, for more in-depth analysis, and also the opportunity for other experts to be able to feed in on the best methods and mechanisms moving forward. I think that's essential. And I think MPs also deserve that. They deserve to have the best information available to them before making such a weighty decision that is not only going to affect us long term, it is also going to be a key part of this government's legacy.
Wonderful. Maha, thank you so much for being on the show with us. Maha Balakrishnan, who's a Parliamentary and Institutional Development Specialist, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.